I'll call the Plan Advisory Committee to order. First, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Sorry for the late start. We're 8 minutes late. 4 of us were at another meeting, so very sorry for that. Okay, next is approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Murray. Second by Councillor Bailey. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Count on my nay. Motion carried. Is there any errors, omissions, or corrections to the minutes of January 16, 2025? Any errors or omissions? Oh, okay, mine.
I'm not sure if this is the right one, but I did notice a typo.
Okay.
That's kind of an important typo. Sorry.
No. Take your time.
Thank you. Okay. In residential density, there's a typo that actually is one of those meaningful typos that could be a problem. It says, number 1, maintain the current proposed requirements for a development agreement for more than 8 units. But it should say no more than 8 units.
That was in what page of the minutes there, Bon?
Oh gosh, it was in the residential density. It was just called residential density. Oh, sorry. I believe
Oh, yeah, so, okay.
page 7, I believe. I'm sorry.
Yes, it says for more than, yeah, it should be for 8 units or less, is it?
Yes, thank you very much.
In community core? Is that right, Ian? On the application and options for residential density, maintain the current requirements for development agreement for more than 8 units on a lot in the community core.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The community core zone does
Permit?
require, let me see here. Oh yeah, it does require a development agreement for more than 8 units.
Yeah.
So it's more than. Below that, you are just require the permit.
Amendment to the permit more than 8. That will trigger a development permit.
Yeah,
Development.
you'd require the development permit, but the development agreement would be a separate council process for those more than.
Yeah. So it is correct in what's there.
Yes, should be. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. I guess that is correct. It just means that you have to get a development agreement, right, for that area.
Yeah.
Okay? So any other errors, omissions, or corrections? One more time, any errors, omissions, or corrections to the minutes of January 16? Seeing none, we'll consider those approved. Next is a correspondence, a letter from the Municipal Affairs regarding wind turbine setbacks. That was a little shocker when I read that. If I read it correctly, I don't know if Brian, did you want to lead us in that, or did you?
It doesn't necessarily mean that our bylaw is not valid. If somebody was to create say a large-scale wind turbine that was 200 meters in height, then 4 times that height is 800 meters, our bylaw would be overruled by provincial regulation. So I don't know, actually, when I think that through, I think our bylaw probably is a kilometer, probably doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. That's what I figured.
Mr. Chair, how tall are turbines that we're talking about, the new ones?
The current ones that are out there, I think, are 100 meters.
300 and some feet, that's what I
Yeah.
figured. Yeah.
So that would only be less than half the distance we have now then.
Yeah.
I was figuring it'd be roughly 500 meters, which is half of the distance what we have.
Yeah.
And we were 600 to start with a while ago, you know, we worked our way up from 600 to a kilometer.
So in there, it also said about talking to your solicitor about it. So that overrules any bylaw that we have currently? It does?
Yeah, provincial regulation would overrule because this is the minimum planning standard that you have to meet.
And that's the maximum distance that they're
It's not really a
saying.
minimum, it's a maximum.
And they say the maximum is 4 times the height.
4 times the height, yeah.
And then the decibels, let's say you build one and the decibel level is more than 40. How do you correct that? And the flickering, who comes out with the flickering?
We never regulated aesthetics or viewscape. That wasn't a criteria in our bylaws, so we're okay on that side of the equation. The setback, our decibel level,
It's 40.
I think it is 40, yeah.
40.
So on the noise side, we're,
Yeah, but that's 1,000 meters away.
I think so, yeah.
yeah,
So this here could be up to 500 meters away.
yeah,
So you're half the distance.
yeah.
Why couldn't they come up with this in 2006? Saved a lot of headaches. Saved a lot of headaches, I know that. Gordon?
When I saw this letter, I sort of felt the same as you, that, wow, this is gonna be difficult to go back to the public now after all the talk about being a meter, or a kilometer, and say that, well, by provincial rule, we have to be a half kilometer now. That's gonna be a tough sell, especially in certain areas where we've had problems, but, do we now, like, having gotten this letter, so far through this whole process, we sort of said, well, we have bylaws on wind turbines and everything, we're not touching them. Does this letter change that? Can we just kind of skip over that and say, well, we're doing that later or something? Or does that then become part of this first hearing, second hearing and everything? I just wonder what your opinion is of that, I guess, Ian.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair. So my understanding of the letter from the minister is that municipal planning documents will be required to meet the multiple of height for the setback distance, and yours is currently 1,000 meters, so you'd have to update your distance to be 4 times the height. The 40 decibels, which you meet, and then as Mr. Cullen mentioned, the aesthetics piece, which you already meet as well. Through this plan review, we have taken the approach of not touching the wind turbine bylaw. It stays separate. We are not re-adopting it or anything like that. So for the purposes of the plan review, or the developing the new municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw, I don't see a need to change anything at this point. Yeah, we can pass, I believe, the documents that we have because they are not touching the wind aspect. My understanding in the letter from the minister is that they have not put a hard timeline on when municipalities must come into compliance, but that you'll be getting a call from your advisor at Municipal Affairs to talk through with you, how to go through that process and what's kind of expected timeline-wise. So my understanding is that you would come back at a later date and update your wind turbine bylaw to be compliant.
Yeah. That's what I figured. Yep.
Follow-up question.
Gordon?
So does that mean, like, when we're finished this, let's say we get it all done, and put to bed, do we go through that whole process again for the wind bylaw because these changes are there? You can bet that certain people are gonna be pretty upset if we're going back to where before, farther back than where we were at the 600.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, you would be amending the wind turbine plan and bylaw separately because they're standalone documents. So you would have to go through that process for them. I do imagine people will be upset, but at least you have the advantage of being able to point the finger elsewhere, and then when that upset comes.
Yeah, you're bringing your bylaw into compliance with provincial rules,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're gonna take the heat, but it's not your fire. Or you didn't start the fire.
Same as what we're doing here.
Exactly the same thing, we're always able to say, well, it wasn't us that started this, you know. But I think it is gonna cause a lot of disruption, more so than what we're going through now, really. The wind is the one we've had the most opposition from, you know, and with all the big new wind towers going up, there's a whole group out there just waiting to go at somebody, you know, that, are probably gonna come see us. I guess we just have, we're the ones that are gonna have to take it on the chin for the province.
There's not much we can do when it's legislated.
No.
You know, we have to follow their rules, so.
Just, Mr. Chair, does this mean that we gotta go back to the public with this again, or is it as simple as amending our bylaw in-house? And on the decimals, are we to police that, I wonder? Or will be the province when it's coming from
We would have to go to the public, wouldn't we, Brian, to amend our bylaw?
Oh, well, you don't necessarily need to do public consultation, but you need to follow the process, right? So you amend your bylaw, first reading, public hearing, right? You still have to follow that
All that.
process. You could go out to the public and say, we're doing this because we're being told to. We do not agree, we don't, right?
If it was put ahead more than 1 hour, then we definitely have to go to the public, because it would be more than what we have in place now.
No, if it was more,
They'd like that. Most of the public would like it being more.
yeah, if their standard put it
Past hours.
past hours, then you would be amending it to match, right? But in this case, your existing turbines that are out there, like your big wind, I think they're only 100 meters,
I think so.
right? So that's 300 meters, or 400 meters. They may be 130, right? But I think most of them are around 300 feet.
Even like you said, if there were 200 meters, it's still less than our bylaw would be, so. Gordon?
I think this all came from Hants County. They passed a bylaw in there for Hants that was gonna be what they've asked for here, which is 3 kilometers. Plus, they were ruling some out on aesthetics, on the look. So the province didn't like any of that and canceled it all right away, said they couldn't do it. And this is to prevent the rest of us from doing the same thing, I think is what it is. They didn't want to have to deal with each one separately like they did with Hants, so they put this out to prevent other counties, not just us, but from doing the same thing. I think that's where it comes from.
I wish they had went a little greater than what it is, right? So,
See, they did a consultation last fall where they asked questions like around setbacks and, right?
Did they ask them, did they ask the municipalities, or did they go to the public?
No, it was a survey of municipalities. How do you regulate,
Oh, yeah,
right? Whether it's distance or
property.
distance related to the height or straight distance type thing. It will be interesting because we have
What about the,
developed, we have permits issued for new turbines based on the old rules.
hopefully they follow the old rules.
Well, no, they were meeting the old rules,
Yeah.
but in theory,
Hopefully
they could
will.
withdraw those permits and then come back and move closer to,
So what about the distance from a property line? Will our bylaws still, because you could be, a house could be 350 meters from their property line in, and then somebody could build. Will that still be in?
Yeah, I don't think we need to necessarily change that component.
That component, because that will set it back further if possible, but you still have to have that setback, so that's,
But your setback from property lines, I guess in theory, could conflict with that overall distance.
in some cases, but
In some
not
cases.
most cases.
Most cases, it's probably not an issue.
But that is something we'll have to leave in our bylaws. Okay. Anybody else? I guess this is something that this committee will have to deal with in the future, once we get word from the province when they want to roll that out, so. Just tell them it was not us. Anyway, we'll move on. Review of the land use bylaw. And Ian, do you want to start us and
Yes. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as many of you are aware, those of you who are council members, council held a public hearing on the draft planning documents. And following that public hearing, considered second reading. At that time, referred the documents back to you as a planning advisory committee, primarily on the basis of compliance with the statement of provincial interest on source regarding drinking water. But we also received many comments through the public hearing, so we can also review those tonight as well. So just as a reminder, our obligations as a municipality are to meet the Municipal Government Act and the minimum planning requirements regulations. And within that Municipal Government Act, there are 5 statements of provincial interest on regarding housing, infrastructure, agriculture, drinking water, and flood risk areas. Typically what does happen is when these documents are passed by a council, they go to the Department of Municipal Affairs, who review them against the minimum planning requirements regulations and against the statements of provincial interest. If the department feels like they may not be in compliance with either of those, they bump it up to the minister for ministerial review, and it comes down to the minister to review documents and make a determination of whether the documents are acceptable. The minister can adopt or approve the documents as is, can make amendments to the documents in any way he sees fit, or can reject the documents. We typically, as part of our regular planning practice, once we get to a draft document stage, like to flip them off to the Department of Municipal Affairs for an informal review. It's very helpful. I really appreciate that they do that for us. So they don't have to under the Act, but they do. They take the time to do that, which I appreciate. In this case, with your documents, we were on a tight timeline, and the comments from Municipal Affairs did not come back before we finalized the drafts for the public hearing. So that was unfortunate, but again, I can't fault them for that. It was a tight timeline, and they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. So at the end of the day, the responsibility falls to us, the planners, to ensure compliance with the statement of provincial interest. So in that review, there was a couple things they flagged, and the biggest one, I think, is and the reason these documents primarily got bumped back to you as a planning advisory committee is the statement of provincial interest regarding drinking water. So that statement, first of all, requires that planning documents must identify all municipal water supply watersheds within the planning area. And where I fell down on this one, and I take responsibility for this, is missing that the Municipality of Antigonish, their Browns Mountain water supply, crosses into Pictou County a small amount, and we miss that, and it is not identified in these planning documents. So we do not comply with that #1 requirement there. Beyond that, the statement requires that planning documents must address the protection of drinking water in municipal water supply watersheds. And then it says measures that should be considered include, and there's a bunch of them, restricting the uses that could pose a threat to drinking water, and we do that in some areas and not others, or to varying degrees in different watersheds, which I'll talk about in a second. Balancing the expansion of existing uses against the risks posed to drinking water. Again, how we do that varies depending on the watershed in these documents. Limiting the number of lots, same deal, kind of depends on the watershed. Setting out separation distances between new development and watercourses to provide protection from runoff, and we do that in these documents. And then establishing measures to reduce erosion, sedimentation, runoff, and vegetation removal associated with development. These planning documents do not do that, particularly because things like vegetation removal, while we have the power to do that under the Act, it's really, really challenging for a municipality, especially when you're starting planning from the ground up. And, these should consider. We don't have to do all of these things necessarily to find ourselves in compliance. These are should consider, and this one in particular is quite challenging and don't necessarily recommend you go down that route. Then it says that existing land use and location, size, and soil conditions of municipal water supply watershed will determine the land use controls that should be applied. So recognizing that some areas have well fields that are small and very vulnerable to contamination, where other areas like, for example, Stellarton, get their drinking water from a river that has a massive watershed. The level of control is going to vary depending on the context. And it's recognized that in some situations, that protection might not be as strong, or because it may be impractical. And finally, the statement notes that the province supports the preparation of watershed management strategies for all municipal water supply watersheds, and that these strategies should be prepared by the concerned municipalities and the municipal water utility in consultation with all affected parties, including landowners. So, the current draft documents, as they went to council, do not, as I mentioned, currently identify the Antigonish water supply area. So it's a small area. It covers 3 PIDs in the very eastern end of the county on the Antigonish boundary, but it is, again, a watershed area, and we do have to identify it. Approximately a third of the land south of this power transmission corridor, is already zoned conservation and is protected that way. The remainder is zoned rural general. For New Glasgow and Pictou, the current planning documents, and we've talked about this a number of times between this committee and council, the planning documents currently identify and protect the primary watershed of Forbes Lakes, that's New Glasgow, and the well fields of Pictou, the town of Pictou, using the shoreline zone. That zone has larger lot sizes, it limits the range of uses, so it meets that requirement of identifying, and it also, I would say, meets those other requirements or other suggestions of the statement of provincial interest. Furthermore, around Forbes Lake, we have increased the watercourse buffer, the setback that buildings have to be from the lake, from the standard 15 meters to 50 meters, and there's no mechanism to reduce that in the documents, so buildings have to be far from the lake. So that S1 zone, it does have a long list of permitted uses, but most of them are fairly low intensity uses. Accommodations, farmers markets, marinas, private clubs, restaurants, dwellings up to 2 units on a lot, whole bunch of different things, hobby livestock farms. That one was flagged by the town of New Glasgow. Existing cemeteries, existing agriculture related uses. Again, it's a fairly long list when you look at it, but most of these uses are fairly benign from a water quality perspective, other than the fact that they're development. The S1 zone also has the ability to consider by development agreement. So again, this is a council process and a public process, more than 2 dwellings on a lot, nursing homes, and residential care facilities. And there is policy in the plan that any development agreement application, so if an application came in for one of these 3 things, or a rezoning application, so if someone came in to change the zoning out of the S1 zone, you would refer those to the applicable town for comment and then may turn down the application or put controls in the development agreement in response to those comments. So that's a policy that's in the plan. New Glasgow has submitted a couple of submissions over the course of the project regarding the watershed, and some of which we discussed previously, but in their most recent letter have requested that the S1 zone also be extended to their secondary watershed. They've raised concerns about development agreements, and I think this is a bit of a misunderstanding, because there is that policy, again, referring to development agreement applications, and we refer them, that we would send them to the town for things like industrial uses, that sort of thing, but those aren't actually enabled in the S1 zone, so you can't apply for a development agreement for an industrial use, for example, in the S1 zone. So I think that's more of a misunderstanding, but there is that concern there about development agreements. The town would also like to see that that 50 meters be increased to 75 meters, and that there be a 50-meter vegetative buffer, that you would have actual controls on vegetation. And then finally, the town has requested that there be an overlay that applies on top of the zoning, that, despite whatever the zoning says, provides additional restrictions on uses, so prohibiting hospitals, industrial uses, commercial uses, nursing homes, residential care facilities, scrapyards, etc. So a fairly strict restriction of uses. So this is the map they've provided. So this is the primary water. It's black and white, so it's a little hard to see, but this is Forbes Lake here. This is the primary watershed that we have mapped in the S1 zone right here. And then the secondary watershed is further to the east and is about equal in size to the primary watershed. So they would like to see that secondary one also included. The town of Pictou initially, their initial request again was to include to include protective zoning, which we did with the S1 zone. They reviewed that, and their CAO had communicated that he was happy with the S1 zone. However, he had concern about that same development agreement policy, and again, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding there. It doesn't allow industrial uses. It doesn't allow scrapyards through that policy. Those uses still have to be enabled by development in that zone, and in the S1 zone, the only things that are enabled are larger residential developments, nursing homes, and residential care facilities. So I think, my understanding is that we should be good on the Pictou front, other than maybe clarifying that policy. Then there's Trenton and Stellarton. So Trenton has well fields that extend partially into the municipality, and then Stellarton draws its water from the East River, which has a massive watershed. So we have mapped both of those in the municipal planning strategy, so we meet that requirement for identifying them. That's all fine and good. And we have that policy. So in these areas, because they're zoned things like rural general, there is an ability through development agreement to do industrial uses, to rezone to industrial or rural commercial. But again, it's a council process, it's a public process, it's not a as of right, there is a process to it. So we have policy that any of those rezonings or development agreements would be referred to those towns for comment, and then again, that council may, in considering those comments, put conditions on or turn down the application. So there's not a whole lot for restrictions in these areas, other than that some of these more intense uses would be, that go through a council process, would be referred, and that you could control those uses as a result. And then finally, Stellarton. Oh yeah, the request from Stellarton that we got, written request, is that they get notification of commercial development agreements within 30 meters of East River. And they requested further information about what it would actually be permitted within 30 meters of East River. And then the town of Trenton, they didn't, I'm not sure they gave us a specific request so much as they sent us a map of their wellfield zoning. So some of the Zone C, which is, Zone C, I think it's 20-year time of travel. So if something got in the ground, it would take 20 years to get to or maybe it's 25, to the wellheads. Some of that Zone C extends into the municipality, and they also provided us with their source water protection plan. That document talks about some of the existing threats to the water supply, but it doesn't necessarily provide any specific direction regarding controlling future threats. So it's a little fuzzy there about what's needed to be done, but you know, certainly I think stronger than what we have. So in looking at that, again, at that statement of provincial interest regarding drinking water, we've come up with some recommendations that we think should put us squarely on side in meeting that statement. That's not to say that these recommendations meet all the requests of us. These are just what we think we should have in these documents to make sure that we're not falling afoul of the Municipal Government Act. So if you would like to go further, we can certainly discuss that. But at a minimum, we recommend first and foremost identifying the Antigonish source water area. That's a clear non-compliance with the statement. We should also probably identify the secondary watershed for Forbes Lake. That's a little more fuzzy on whether that's required under this statement or not, but I would suggest if we want to be clearly on side, we should do that. I would suggest we should apply the S1 zone to the portions of the Trenton well fields that fall within the municipality. And then actually have policy to not consider rezonings out of that S1 zone in the watershed areas, except to align with updated boundaries of a source water areas. So basically, we've put this S1 zone on New Glasgow, Trenton, Pictou areas, and that you won't actually, you won't entertain requests to change it to a different zone unless it's in compliance with the towns updating their boundaries. We could also strengthen the policy and refer all rezoning and development agreement applications to the applicable town, and that have it say that council shall take action in response to comments, that you shall turn down an application or shall put requirements in the development agreement if the town flags credible threats to the drinking water. So again, this wouldn't really be applicable in the S1, well, it would be in the S1 zones for larger residential developments, nursing homes, or residential care facilities, but otherwise, if we prohibit rezoning and there's no other development agreements, it wouldn't really be applicable there so much. This would be for the larger watersheds where restrictive zoning, it would be practical given the size of them, so especially the East River watershed. And then if we want to be really clear, we could also, despite the underlying zoning, prohibit some really higher risk uses in all municipal watersheds. So things like automotive fueling, automobile washing, mineral related uses, hazardous industrial uses, cemeteries, that kind of thing. So even in the East River watershed, for example, and despite what the underlying zoning says, we could prohibit certain uses that we know are potential risks to drinking water. So that is on the matter of.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions may not be able to be addressed by this process, but I have a particular concern about Northern Pulp and the decommissioning of Northern Pulp. As you know, they're looking to put a pulp mill in Liverpool, and this pulp mill would have to be decommissioned. So there's going to be a big disturbance of land there with the decommissioning, and if there's any particular potential risk to water in that area as they start to decommission that mill and they start disturbing a lot of the land around that mill where there's a lot of contaminated soil. So I'm just wondering if this is all about development, but if you, on the flip side of things, if you're decommissioning something, is there any way that we can protect water in that regard as well? And the second issue was that I've heard that potentially They're looking to take the dregs from Boat Harbor and placing them on the site of the existing Northern Pulp. So that's potentially a very disturbing concept as well. So is there any way that if that can be addressed through this process? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The decommissioning side of things, I'm not off the top of my head can think of a way that we would necessarily address that through these documents. You know, again, it is kind of undevelopment rather than development. I suspect we'd be more reliant on the, you know, Department of Environment for that. To control that process and any of the remediation side of things. On what we have done, on the actual Boat Harbor lands themselves that aren't part of the First Nation lands, so there are some lands that are not on the reserve lands, we have put those lands in the Comprehensive Development District. So that zone requires that any, any development that happens there would be through a development agreement process. So it'd be a council process, it would be a public process, and presumably it'd very closely involve the nation as well, Pictou Landing. So, you know, that provides a tool to, at least, you know, as far as the municipality's role in the future of those lands go, to have a close oversight of it. In terms of the actual disposal of the effluent on the former mill site, that is a good question. It would depend on, and you know, I think it would probably be worth getting a legal opinion on this at some point in if that comes to pass, but if you could justify that qualifying as a hazardous industrial use or a solid waste disposal under this bylaw, both of those uses also require a development agreement process. So, you know, if you could, with your solicitor, determine that you had the authority to regulate that and that it met, you know, your standard of what a hazardous industrial use is or a solid waste disposal would be, then you would have a tool with the development agreement process to have greater oversight of how that happens.
Okay. Warden Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to comment on what Councilor Turner just brought up first, and then I'll get to my questions with Glasgow. There's certainly a broadly spread rumor out there that the dregs, as Councilor Turner calls them, from Boat Harbor may end up down the Granton Road. So can our zoning do anything to prevent that from happening? You know, again, we're talking an area that's probably rural general now, or maybe in that second one we picked, what was the one between rural general and anything else?
Rural mixed use?
Rural mixed use. It may have got put into that. But if that land is purchased by the Pictou Landing First Nations down that Granton Road, do we then have no control over what happens there? You just mentioned that, well, excepting for the land that's owned by Pictou Landing First Nation, because that's the rumor, is that land has been purchased. And so when somebody says there's no other place to dump it, well, we got a place right here. Is there any protection for the people in that area from that happening?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So my understanding, and again, you would want to clarify this with your solicitor, is that municipalities, through these planning documents, don't have control over reserve lands. Lands that are designated reserves, they're federal land, you don't have planning control over those. However, my understanding is these planning documents do apply to land outside reserves even if they are owned by the band, is my understanding. So that often comes up in those like commercial developments at highway interchanges. You know, municipal planning applies even though they're owned by the band. And then the other question I think for your solicitor would be whether you have any planning authority over hazardous waste as does that constitute development? would be a question as well, or is that squarely a provincial authority? It's not something I've come across before, so I apologize for not having a more thorough answer on this, but you'd want to confirm that.
Some people in that area are concerned,
Yeah.
and they're not even sure if this is fact or if it's only rumor, but certainly broadly spread in that area. But I understand that it's probably provincial interest, but I just didn't know if we had any way to control that or not, but we can ask our legal advisor, I guess. But on the, I didn't really understand what the lady from the Glasgow was asking for the night she presented here. And at the end, she more or less said, this overlay, if we had this overlay, then we'd be protected. So where's that come into what we're talking about here? She talked about having some type of overlay, and I think she was talking about on the primary watershed.
Yeah, so, through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding, at least from the letter request, was that, yeah, they would like to have an additional overlay that applies regardless of whatever the zoning is, that limits certain uses. So basically prohibits hospitals, prohibits industrial uses, prohibits commercial uses, prohibits nursing homes, residential care facilities, scrapyards, warehousing, mining operations, marinas, marine recreation providers, dwellings of more than 2 units per lot, emergency services, government uses, medical clinics, hobby livestock farms, water access, hazardous industrial uses, and agriculture. Many of those are already not permitted in the S1 zone, but some, like things, you know, hobby livestock farms are currently permitted in that zone. Government uses, emergency services, those are all permitted in that zone. So this would further restrict, without changing the zone itself, this would be kind of on top of those restrictions.
So how far does that overlay go back? Like we talked about 50 meters being extended to 75, but when they put this overlay on, is that still 50 or 75 meters, or does that go a whole lot farther than that?
My understanding was that they wanted it for both the primary and secondary watersheds, so that whole area in these, in this outer boundary.
So it would extend beyond even the 75
Oh,
meters
yeah,
maybe?
absolutely. That, I mean, this extends all the way to, it's hard to read. Can't see the roads there, but that's probably a couple hundred acres at least.
Yeah, I just find it's an over ask, Brenda. I think most people would agree. We want Forbes like to stay clean too. It feeds a lot of or feeds water anyway to a lot of our people. But you know, that overlay part seemed to be a stretch to me. Even the 50 meters up to 75, I questioned some of, and can you go back to the previous screen that was up there? Yeah, the one where, now there was one that said that, that we shall, you know, anything that they ask for, we shall give them. Yeah, there's the word shall. And council shall take action in response to comments. So if they say they want this, or they want that, they want this, shall means that you do it, not that you think about doing it. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't have any problem with anything at the bottom of that list, that whole list there, or the one you read off maybe.
Yep.
You know, of having those ones on there not being anywhere close to the water. But people that own land up there, I think have some rights here. You know, if you start extending way too far back and you start extending, I don't think anybody's gonna put a new cemetery up there or auto fueling and whatnot, but so that whole list could easily be, we could agree not to have those there, but to put almost no development at all, you know, for a long ways back, seems a bit too extreme. You know, if the province says you have to have that, well, then we'll be the same boat as we are with the wind towers, but you know, I think it's a bit too extreme what they're asking for. But I do agree with trying to protect the water, but only to a degree. And do we have any obligation then to consult with the homeowners in that area if we were just to turn around? I thought you spoke that earlier or whatever, to consult with the homeowners.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the consultation, we do have the obligation, and that obligation is the public hearing. You know, that's what we have to do, is hold that public hearing. I do have a concern, and I think, you know, in terms of the town's request, many of those uses aren't necessarily that impactful, or they aren't when you combine them with the it is a provincially designated drinking water area under the Environment Act, and there are controls on things like fuel oil tanks and that sort of thing, home heating oil. My concern, is having that very strict level of restriction on those lands without that detailed consultation with those landowners. It's not to say that this ask is unreasonable, rather it should be done as part of that update the source water protection plan, work with the landowners to identify specific restrictions that you should, include in your planning documents, but that it would be more of a process that has meaningful discussion rather than us at the last minute slapping it on people and restricting them overly. So I don't, their request isn't necessarily out to lunch, but I do feel like it is a restrictive ask at this stage.
I don't know how others feel, but I don't like the word shall in there anyway. It sort of takes any authority we have away and says we have to do whatever they demand of us.
The shall is council shall take action in response to comment. The action could be, we're not going to do anything.
Okay, all right, if that's the case, I just took shall
Right.
mean if we want this done, we get it done.
Maybe it needs to be worded a little different,
Yeah.
that council will consider, but at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with, like, if they say they don't want X development, and council's like, well, really, that's no different than what's there today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Chair, I think we should word it in a way that it's shall in regard to a demonstrated increase in risk. It's not just that we don't like this development, but that this development is going to impact the drinking water risk like that. That's the litmus test
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah, and I think in one of their letters, they made reference to requirements being imposed on them by the Department of Environment. Well, demonstrate that that's actually the case, that environment saying, well, you shall do this, and then, right? Which hasn't been done. It's a vague reference.
Bonnie?
Thank you. So then maybe the wording should be changed. Council shall take action in response to comments. That could be subject to different interpretations. Maybe it should say council shall take action to respond to comments. Because otherwise someone could say, hey, thank you.
Okay. I have, go ahead, Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we took what they're requesting an overlay and put it under 50 meters, what would that do? Instead of going to 75? Would that change a whole lot or not much?
so, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So there's two separate things here. So the overlay that they're asking for is for the whole watershed. That they want this overlay that prohibits hospitals and emergency services and all that to apply to the whole primary and secondary watershed. So in all of those properties, to not allow those uses. What they, yeah, to this kind of heavier line here. They have a separate request, which is, so in our current document, we require buildings to be a minimum of 50 meters from Forbes Lake. They have a separate request to increase that distance that a building has to be from Forbes Lake to 75 meters. And they would also like to have a 50-meter area where we don't permit the removal of vegetation. That's a little challenging. We can do that under the Act, but we can only control vegetation removal in relation to development. It's a funny little loophole. So we could have a rule about vegetation removal if we want to. It's possible under the Act. But if someone clears that vegetation before they do development, before they come in for a permit, we have no teeth. And it's also something that you have to monitor and be able to, so someone clears, you need to have evidence that they did that. And that's very challenging. It's one of those, I get that it makes people frustrated. I get frustrated with it, but it's one of those kind of gaps that we have in our tools as planners. We can do it, but it's not a very good tool. so I don't recommend it. But they've also requested that 50 meters for buildings to be increased to 75.
Okay. Just a question to, the secondary watershed. What was the purpose of them asking? Now, they have a lake that's up behind the existing Forbes Lake, right? For future development.
Yeah.
Is that the reason for the secondary watershed?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding, so they have that designated, provincially designated under the Environment Act, water supply, protected water supply area. And their designation has sets of rules for things like manure storage, for gasoline tanks, for swimming and boating and all those things. And it has kind of two tiers of rules. There's more stringent rules that apply in the primary watershed and less stringent ones that apply in the secondary watershed. So I think, my understanding, that's the reason for having two of them, is that, yeah. So like the things that are the most risk are prohibited in both, but some of the lower risk things might be permitted in the secondary watershed, but not the primary.
So they want the primary and the secondary to be the same.
From a land use planning perspective, yes.
Okay, so there's no industrial use permitted in S1 zones, so that's not that should be a concern for them.
Yes, that's correct. Currently, we only have the S1 zone on the primary watershed, though. So in theory, there could be an industrial use in the current draft in the secondary watershed, though it would go via development agreement. It would be a development agreement process, so that comes to council, and through that policy that we have now, you would refer that to them for comment. So someone could ask for it, but you would still have to go through a whole council and comment process, and you could turn it down on the basis of risk. So it's not impossible, but it's unlikely, but they may want more certainty.
So,
One way to do that would be to extend the S1 zone to the whole secondary watershed. It's a larger area, it does impact more people, but.
the other thing is like hobby farms. Like I wouldn't want to see a hobby farm in an S1 zone. To me, that's, you know what I mean? Is that something that we can remove from the S1 zone?
Yeah, especially since the S1 zone currently is only being used on watersheds.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the whole area. Like, I don't see any reason not to.
Would that be agreeable with everyone? Gordon?
What about this consultation with landowners? You're taking a lot more landowners once you come to that secondary zone. You know, if we're gonna make some special rules for Forbes Lake, primary or secondary, shouldn't they be a part of that process, at least know what we're doing before we suddenly announce that? I don't know how far away, I'm picturing where Forbes Lake is, and down on the far bottom end here on the right, you know, you'd be in the S1 zone, I guess, of that secondary.
Yeah.
How far away from Forbes Lake is that? Could it be questioned by landowners about, you know, my God, I'm a mile away or something, you know, or 2 miles, whatever?
That, let me see here. That road looks to be. Oops. I think that this little intersection here. Am I looking at this right? Let me see. Forbes Lake's there. That's that. Yeah, so this little road here is Coramoni Road?
What is it?
Coramoni Road? This line here. So that distance is about, we're talking probably over 5 kilometers from the lake to the edge of the watershed.
That's where I'm questioning whether the public is gonna, you know, see that there's a need to, say, eliminate your hobby farm 4 or 5 kilometers down the road.
So I was only looking at
Primary, was it?
Primary.
Okay, yeah, I can see it on the primary, you know, even it extends, if you look at the distance actually where the lake is, it extends quite a ways down the road.
Yeah.
I don't know if you took a drive up there, if you'd find some hobby farms within that or not.
Yeah, this is Irish Mountain Road here, this
Farm right
line.
across the road, right, so. Used to be a chicken farm, it's still there, I think.
Yeah, I know the one you mean up on top of the hill there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, if you don't eliminate it, then in the primary zone, like, somebody could put a shore at the far end, but then somebody could put it at right at the start of it, if you don't eliminate it altogether, so.
I'm
And
not
I don't-
against looking at it, but I think we have to.
I don't think the land up there, the only thing is on the opposite side of the lake, of the road, that could be, and it is now, right, so. But if you head further towards Springville, I just can't see too many people having a farm along there.
Yeah, if I may, I think my suggestion would be remove the hobby farms from the S1 zone, but keep the S1 zone just to the primary watershed. And for that secondary watershed, treat it more like we're gonna do with Stellarton's and with the Antigonish one, where it's a large surface area watershed, that the restriction, we identify them, we have those, we refer all development agreements and all rezonings to the town for comment, and that we restrict some of those heaviest uses, but but because it's a larger area, it's further away from the water supply, that we don't have that same level as we do with the S1 zone.
And that was my next question, was the industrial use in the town southern watershed, is that gonna be it's not gonna be an S1 zone, it's gonna be another zone? Is that?
Yeah, so for Stellarton, because it's such a huge area, it's the whole watershed for the East River, I think putting specific zoning there would be impractical. It's mostly rural general, but there's other zones in there for different things. So I would suggest that we leave the zoning what it is, and then, but have a prohibition that despite underlying zoning, despite whatever the zoning says, that some of those,
Setback distance.
some of those really potentially impactful uses like automobile fueling or heavy industrial uses or scrap yards or warehousing that involves certain chemicals, that those would be prohibited no matter what the zoning says in those in any of the watersheds.
And we'll still have a setback of 50 meters,
The 50 is only for Forbes Lake.
only for 40 Lake?
Yeah, it's 15 everywhere else. Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, when did the second watershed come into play? I didn't hear about it until the meeting in March. Were you aware of that all the way through it, or did it just pop up similar to Antigonish?
So the Forbes Lake secondary watershed? Yeah, so we did discuss it back when we discussed the town's original request. When I met with the town's engineer or water engineer regarding this plan, her focus was specifically on the primary watershed, so we knew that both were there, but the request that I got in that meeting was both were important, but if we were going to do anything, that the primary watershed was the focus. And so when we discussed how we were going to protect the town of New Glasgow watershed last time, this was at PAC, the discussion was to focus on the primary watershed.
Okay, so I guess, so the secondary one is registered as a watershed now? It is, to the province it's right.
Correct.
So what are we going to get a kickback from the province if we don't recognize this? Is it going to come back to us saying, okay, you got Forbes Lake, you're giving Forbes Lake this year, which I feel it's comfortable, but you're not looking after their secondary one, which they have, and it's to the town of Glasgow, or to anybody, would be just important as their first one? That's the question, and I don't know if anybody can answer it, but to me, I think we're opening ourselves up for the province to come back and say, you gotta do all the watershed. And I could be 100% wrong, but that's what I think will happen.
So, Mr. Chair,
Warden?
what are we doing with the secondary? Are we putting S1 around that one or not? We haven't made that decision.
No.
And so, Councillor Bailey's right when he's saying that we're not doing anything right now for that secondary, water site or whatever. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything with the secondary, but it should be reduced compared to the actual Forbes Lake. You know, I'm not against if they want to go from 50 to 75 meters for Forbes Lake. That part doesn't upset me as much as them being able to say, well, I want this and you have to do it. But, and maybe just leave it at 50 around the primary. But I wouldn't want to eliminate all development around that secondary, because suddenly you're taking in a whole lot more land, a whole lot more owners without any idea that they've suddenly, you know, they may not even know. If we didn't know, I'm sure most of the public doesn't even know that there's a secondary watershed here. So all of a sudden they get news that I can't do anything on my land, you know, because I'm now within the water. I'm sure most people think it's around Forbes Lake where the you know, restrictions are, not on the other side of the road and quite a ways away. So, you know, but I do agree that we probably, where it is identified as a watershed, have something, some type of protection there, but not without consulting, I don't think, with the neighbors there.
Just. I'm looking something. Is that primary or secondary watershed to take in their other source? Is that why they asked for it, or is it, what's the purpose of the secondary watershed?
I'm not necessarily aware of a second source. I mean, ultimately that water does end up in Forbes Lake, but it's further away. So, you know, my understanding is that it's designated because it does end up in the lake eventually. But it's designated to a lower standard under the provincial regulations, you know, because, for example, if there was a fuel spill in that area, you'd have more time to address it, for example, than if it was next to the lake. Whether there's another water source there, I'm not sure.
They do have a lake up and back of this one.
I heard
I'm not
about
sure.
that one before. Yeah.
They have, with potential of hooking into it to have more water source, but I'm not sure if it's the one back here, which is a distance away, so.
I mean, there's a risk of any tributary that runs into the lake, you know, getting polluted, so you could, I'm sure there's lots of different brooks and whatnot that run into that lake feeding it.
Yeah.
You know, we could move to protecting all those, and that takes in a heck of a lot of land.
Yeah. Lake takes in this area right here. Okay. What's your pleasure? How should we proceed?
I think they want us to give them something, and I don't know where the province stands, but I think the town definitely wants us to give them something. And like I said before, I don't have a problem with going from 50 to 75, that'll keep them happy. Or making sure there's no hobby farms allowed around the Forbes Lake part. That's a couple things we can give them, and maybe that'll be enough for now, but in terms of that secondary area, I just don't even think it's understood at all now, and I think it'd be an awful shock to some of those landowners to realize that they're within the watershed area, and so I think there's some steps that would have to be taken before we can go that far, maybe.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you. I guess it's similar to what the warden's saying there to go, is that if we went to 75, as he mentioned, on the main watershed, and then left the other one for future, I don't know what the word is, future discussions with the town? Could we get away with something like that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think with the secondary watershed, just to make sure that we're 100% on side with the statement of provincial interest, we should definitely identify it in these documents. And I think we should probably at least have the same level of, same level of basic restrictions that we'd have for the town of Stellarton water supply and the Antigonish one, those like,
Which is just excluding some of that stuff.
yeah, excluding heavy industrial, excluding hazardous industrial, excluding scrapyards, that sort of thing, and also referring development agreements and rezonings to them for comment. I think we should at least do that to
For
clearly-
comment, but not that we shall do anything.
yeah, or that we shall take action in.
Yeah,
in-
different wording.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's as
But,
far as we need to go.
yeah. At least that level, I think would increase the confidence that we'd meet that statement of provincial interest, and then anything beyond that's more about what you want to do with the town of New Glasgow, I would say.
And Mr. Chair, I think future consultation should be with the town and the residents of that area, not just with the town, right? Because there are players here too that I'm sure don't realize they're in the position they are maybe.
So that 75 meters setback is just from
Yeah, between buildings and the lake.
the building and the lake, so it's only affects the first lots in the front, right? Yeah. And I think town of Glasgow owns a lot of those.
Yeah, they bought up a number of them.
Yeah.
So does this exclude something that's there now? Like if somebody doesn't have to tear their building down because they're within 75 meters?
No,
It's just going forward.
going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, everybody in agreement with what was discussed here? Deputy Warden.
Thank you. So on the primary one, we're taking out the hobby farms to get my head around this.
Yes.
And then on the secondary one, we're gonna recommend that none of these things that you get listed up here take place on that list. Okay, thank you.
And we're going to 75 meters from 50.
I'm going from 50 to 75. From
For the primary,
It's
yeah.
only the front lots, right?
And just so I'm totally clear, not misinterpreting, we're okay with also applying the S1 to the to the Trenton well fields? Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
And Pictou, yeah.
And Antigonish and
Yeah.
Sullivan are going to be the same.
Yeah, they'll be treated the same as the secondary watershed of New Glasgow.
Just certain things not allowed. yeah.
Certain things not allowed and referring applications to them. Yeah.
Okay? Everybody clear? Okay.
Okay.
We'll move on then, Ian.
So the next thing, so in the provincial review, and we've talked about this before, and I just wanted to bring it up to you again because I'd be remiss if I didn't bring their comments to you. So the other comment that the provincial planner had on the draft documents was in regard to the provincial statement regarding agricultural land. So that statement requires that planning documents must identify agricultural lands based on soil class, which we have done in these documents. There's a map, it identifies them, we meet that. Then it says that planning documents must address the protection of agricultural land. Measures that should be considered include, and they give a couple here. One is giving priority to uses such as agriculture and agriculture-related uses which do not eliminate the possibility of using land for agricultural purposes in the future. We don't really do that in these documents. In the rural areas where there's these agricultural soils, we don't have a separate agricultural zone or anything like that. That was one of the very early directions we talked about it as a planning advisory committee and determined we didn't want to have a separate agricultural zone. So I'm flagging that, again, that we don't do that. But again, and the thing that I lean on is that this says this should be considered. Doesn't say we have to do this, it says it should be considered. We do limit the number of lots in a sense by, we have a minimum lot size in those areas and the planner was okay with that one. We do set out separation distances between commercial livestock and non-agricultural development. They did flag that puts the onus on the agricultural use, on the livestock use, not on other development, but ultimately they were comfortable that we met that. And we have measures to reduce topsoil removal on lands with the highest agricultural value. So Again, we meet that we meet that suggestion. And then finally, it says, existing land use patterns, economic conditions, and the location and size of agricultural holdings means that not all areas can be protected, blah, 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 blah. Where possible, non-agricultural development should be directed to lands with the lowest agricultural value. So again, that goes back to that first point, that giving priority, that we don't have a separate agricultural zone. They flagged that as something that, the planner feels like we might not meet. All of that being said, I think we've kind of known this, this was a point we discussed early as a PAC, that there is, I'm bringing this to you because they've pointed out, there is a risk here. What will likely happen is that because of this perception of the planner, they will flag this to go to the minister, and it'll be up to the minister to decide. They will say, we don't think this is necessarily compliant. They'll send it for ministerial review, and it will be up to the minister to decide if we stay as we are. Looking at, for example, East Hants, where they pulled out their agricultural zone at the last minute and the minister passed the document. The recent history of planning documents is that you don't have to have an agricultural zone, nor does it say in this statement that you do have to have one. It's a suggestion as one of the things that should be considered, but it doesn't say that you have to. So I'm flagging this as a risk. It may get to the minister and he may have a change of heart and take a different approach, but it is what it is.
Okay, Councilor Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I brought this up with Logan as well, and I think he passed it on to you in regards to topsoil removal. There's a gentleman in the district that I live in, that's how he makes his living, basically. So would that be grandfathered out? You can't zone somebody at a business, I would presume.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So, you can't, existing uses are protected as a non-conforming use, and I do actually have an item later on the slides tonight to deal specifically with that one, because there are some things we can do to clarify, but for that person's future. But, so I do have an item later to deal with that one specifically. Yeah.
Warden?
I want to go back to the agricultural land, and this discussion's been going on for at least 25, 30 years in Nova Scotia. Studies have been done and everything, but there's two ways of looking at it. One is we want to preserve as much good agricultural land as we can. And you still see houses popping up in the middle of big hay fields or, whatever, and that field's gone. So that's recognized as, and that's one of the provincial interests, is to preserve this agricultural land. But on the other hand, you have a farmer who's worked all his life, put every ounce of dollars he had into the farm, developing the farm. And he needs to sell that because that's his pension. He needs to sell that for the going price, the best price he can get, the same as everybody else. But maybe the best price is from a developer who says, I can put 30 homes on here and get well paid for it. So there's a conflict between keeping it in agriculture. If you're a dairy farmer who sells your quota and you've got $1 million or $2 million, then you're fine. But if you're a beef farmer or a whole lot of other types, grain farmers and whatnot, all your money's tied up in the farm. And so you need to sell that in order to get your pension. So there's a tug of war there between which way to go. If most farmers would quickly say, I want my land to stay in agriculture, but I need the money. So, there was talk of the province allowing it to be sold one time for agriculture at a lower price, and the government making up the difference of what that farmer could have gotten. But I never heard it go beyond talk. So that's why there's nobody really setting aside agricultural land, because when you do, you punish the farmer. Now, when we were in Scottsburn, when we did our dog and pony show here or whatever, they spoke loudly at that, and that's where I would expect to hear it most. There's more agriculture in and around the Scottsburn area probably than anywhere in the county. And about not allowing, as they call them, the city people, to come out and fill our fields up full of houses because somebody can pay a lot of money for this land. And that very thing is happening along that strip at 256. You see houses popping up in the hayfields. And they wanted us to stop that somehow. In fact, one fellow said, well, we'll go into the town of Pictou and we'll just take a big area and rope it off and start farming. There are cattle in there and everything. If they're gonna come out and take our land, we'll go and take theirs. I remember that comment. But it's a really difficult one, and the province obviously wants the municipalities to take a stand on this because they know it's an unpopular stand. And what happened in East Hants was all hell was breaking loose because they did just that very thing that they're asking us to do. You know, they said that, you know, we're gonna set aside this land for agriculture. There's a lot of big farms in Hants County that cannot be sold for other than agriculture. And so there was an outcry, and so I think East Hants backed down on their own. I don't think they were told by the government. They backed down on their own. Maybe you folks were involved in that one, were you? No. But, so it's a sticky wicket, that one. So I don't think we can declare agricultural land to be, we're setting land aside for agriculture. The topsoil one is one way of doing something to protect some of the very best agricultural land, because these folks are using topsoil to sell for lawns. I know it's their business, but it's been attempted to have this removed for about 50 years too. But because right up past us, there's probably a 15-acre field that's just nothing but a bunch of holes now. I grew turnips on that field years ago. And there's more all over the place that we're losing some of the very best interval land to topsoil removal. So I don't disagree with what Councillor Turner said, that this guy makes his living that way, but whenever you change some of these things, there has to be something to allow a person to ease out or whatever, but if we don't change something, we just lose more good agricultural land. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? So, are we happy with, one thing about the agricultural land, this here will stop any future topsoil being removed from agricultural land. It's not gonna stop what's existing today, but it will stop expansion and things like that, so.
I'm not sure how we're gonna implement it, or how we're gonna, you know, is everybody who's doing it now allowed to continue, is that what we're talking about? If that case,
Well,
you don't stop it.
No, you can, if they're moving it on that land, we can't stop it, but if they go to move to another piece of property,
Yeah,
then you
depending
can
on how
stop.
it's set up again.
Yeah, but everything is grandfathered in, like, we can't stop, Morgan Anderson, I think you're speaking of, we can't stop him from, his business.
There's Rowley down here.
And Rowley
There's
and
a few
things
of
like
them
that.
are in the business, 3D auto
but,
parts.
but I think what this will stop is any future development, if they wanted to move to another field.
We'd have to set it up that way, yes.
Yeah, that's what we'll talk about when we get to that item.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we good?
Yeah, I think
get
I bring this
get
because
the
the
drift.
provincial planner flagged it, and I just want to flag it to you again. Don't be surprised, I think, if these documents get bumped to the minister because of this, but, you know, we've talked about this many times before, and I think we've chosen this approach as something that, as a committee, we're comfortable with, I think,
Yeah.
is fair to say.
Ask Mr. Chair, what do you expect they might come back to us with and say you haven't gone far enough on the agricultural land? What do you think they're gonna ask us to do?
So, I don't know the minister's mind, so again, what will happen, these documents will go to the provincial planners for review against the statements, and either, if there's no conflict with the act, if they see no perceived conflict, they just approve it. If they see that there's a potential conflict with the act, they flag that and send the documents to the minister, and then the minister gets the final say. I can't say what he'll do, but the most recent one was East Hants, and in their case, because of outcry, their council pulled out the agricultural zoning at the last minute. That document with no agricultural zoning went to the minister, and the minister passed it.
So there's a precedent set.
Exactly. So there's still a risk he could change his mind, that he
Yeah.
could see this as a different context. But at the end of the day, it's in his hands for that.
But this provincial government's looking for development too, so that's probably. Okay, we'll move on then, Ian.
The last thing, well, there was a couple other things the province had flagged, but I'd already actually fixed them, so they're not an issue. The last thing that they did flag was that Section 4D of the minimum planning requirements regulations requires a policy in the MBS describing the procedures to be followed when reviewing a municipal planning strategy. We do have that, but they've actually further said, we've interpreted this section to mean a reference to the Municipality of the County of Pictou public participation policy. So we actually need to add words into the document that says, when you do plan reviews, you'll use your public participation policy. So we need to add those words in. It makes the link. It's a minor change, but I'm just flagging that as the kind of the last comment that they brought up. So we will make that change to the documents to comply. Okay, the next kind of big thing here is the watercourse buffer. So, you may recall some of the discussion of this previously. So the previous draft documents, the ones that you would have when we talked about direction setting for the final drafts, those drafts had a watercourse buffer, so a minimum distance that development had to be from the ordinary high water mark of watercourses of 15.25 meters. And there's a mechanism to reduce that to up to half that distance with on-site study. And that was from all watercourses, and the definition of watercourse in that draft was very broad. It included groundwater, it included ravines. I don't know how that slipped through with us initially, so it would have included lots of things that aren't really what people think of as watercourses. So when we brought that draft to you, we flagged that as an issue with the definition being very broad, and also we had a concern that in the kind of spirit of minimum planning requirements and the fact that the administrative burden that puts on your development officer, that maybe we shouldn't do it to all watercourses, but only larger watercourses. So the direction we got from you at the time was to only do larger watercourses, and so we developed a map, Schedule D of the current draft, that has a map of specific watercourses to which this buffer applies. So only on those watercourses does the buffer apply. That map is based on the Nova Scotia 1 to 10,000 topographic mapping. They do it based on aerial photos. And we've taken that mapping and eliminated the smaller watercourses. So only some watercourses in the current draft have a buffer. We've had a request from the member of the public, you would have seen the letters and everything, to again require that buffer to be from all watercourses, though possibly with a less broad definition than the previous drafts, so that a watercourse would mean the bed and shore of every river, stream, lake, creek, pond, spring, lagoon, and other natural body of water, and the water therein. So going back to kind of that previous draft approach, but with a tighter definition of watercourse. So in this case, rather than having the map, it would just be applicants would have to identify when they have watercourses on their property and provide a 15-meter buffer around that. This is the approach that many municipalities in Nova Scotia take, including Cumberland and Colchester, your neighbors. Not all municipalities do it this way, but a lot of them do. It's all watercourses. So, the request in this case from the member of the public is to return to that all watercourses, which would be more strict and more work on the municipality side, but would also mean more protection for these environments that people value.
Ronnie Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I heard more about watercourses over the last month, and it's from a member of the public in my district. She has a lot of issues. So, Ian, when you say that if we go to include all watercourses, I guess if I look at it from all watercourses, any stream of water is just as important as a big stream is just as small stream is just as important as a little stream. And I know you said that it would put more emphasis on the county, but I think this is an opportunity for us to do all watercourses versus just the big ones. And I know we're dealing with an old map, 2013, I believe it is, but I think it may save us a lot of possible issues. Might create some, but it probably should save more than. So I would be in favor of doing all water courses versus just the large ones.
Okay, Warden?
I concur with Councillor Bailey on this one. I think the letter I read anyway, made a lot of sense. And maybe we jumped a little too quick last time to say, look, let's just do it on some big ones. It'll make it easier and avoid. I think there was some in there that we're getting, even though Councillor Bailey said it is even the small stream is important as a big one, but sometimes it comes down to whether it's a stream or not. You know, because somebody saw a little fish one day in there. I know I've dealt with the Department of Environment enough to know that it's very hard to tell what's a stream or what's a ditch. But I think if we eliminate some of the very hard to identify ones as to whether they're streams, most people, common sense tells them what's a stream, what isn't. But I do think that it should apply to all water courses with that, with taking a few of the very obvious ones out of there. I think that's the right way to go. We don't want people building anything or excavating anything next to our rivers and brooks and whatnot. That's, even in agriculture now, they're not allowed to put the fences anywhere near any type of stream. They used to be, you let your cows just walk through, go down and have a drink and walk through the brook. You can't do that anymore. It's got to be so far back. And in forestry, I mean, it's one of the main requirements that you can't cut within about 50 meters or, no, probably not 50, 15 meters or whatever of any stream. So it's already accepted that applies to all streams. If you're in the woods working, you know, they have to try to identify whether that class is stream or not. But so I think it's the right way to go to restore that to all water courses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else? Deputy?
Just, is it still at 15 or are we going to 7?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the way it's drafted now is it's 15.25 meters, and then you can have an on-site study that looks at, you know, whether reducing that would increase the risk at all. So you can drop it to as low as 7 if you know, someone comes out and says, oh no, you can do that safely, sort of thing.
Okay. The problem that I have here is who's going to determine whether it's a water course? Because a lot of people out there think it's a water course, but it's just a ditch. That's what it is. It's a ditch to drain water, right? So, you know, I think it's gonna put a lot of strain on our staff because they're gonna be called out to say that guy's building it in an area where there used to be a stream, you know, or diverting the water from that onto my property, right? So it becomes a big issue. And the other thing that, like, as far as development, environment will not allow you to develop so close to a water stream anyway. Do they not?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, they do. So there is a permitting process. You have to get a water course alteration permit, but they don't have specific distances. There's rules about when, like, you know, in terms of seasonality and stuff for fish spawning and stuff like that. But you can get approval to build next to a water course.
And sewer setback, though. There is a
Yeah,
sewer
yeah,
setback,
your septic would have to have a
right?
setback.
So,
Yeah, that's correct.
To me, there's some things there like a spring, like, man, I could say there's spring on my property, right? That it gets wet at a certain time, right? But what are other municipalities doing with this?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So, Cumberland and Colchester both have the setback from all water courses, off the top of my head. HRM does. Queens does. District of Yarmouth does. Town of Mahone Bay does the approach that you currently have where major ones are mapped. Trying to think of other ones off the top of my head. I can't off the top of my head go through all of them, but it's pretty common to have a water course setback. And yeah, I think what you flag, and this is kind of why we flagged it originally to take a little step back here, was you know, it does result in, you do end up with those situations where you have to say, oh, is that a water course or is it not? And that takes time and effort. If it's an important, you know, if it's viewed as an important thing to protect, then, you know, that's a call on terms of whether that effort's worth it from a municipal perspective, you know, as a council. So it's really up to you whether.
So, just on that,
Yeah.
is our development officer qualified to determine if it's a water course or not? And if he said that it wasn't a water course, is there an action that the property owner can take to, can they come to council and then council makes that decision?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, or I guess to you, Mr. Chair. So that goes back to, you know, if I were the development officer, if I was a development officer dealing with a document like this, I wouldn't personally go check to see if, like, you know, I don't feel comfortable telling you whether it's a water course or not. I would use those powers in the front of the document that says, if I need to, we have that section in the front that says, in order to confirm compliance with the land use bylaw, the development officer can require extra information. If I was unsure as a development officer, I would put it on the applicant to hire the appropriate professional to say whether or not it is a water course, and then I would take that at the professional's value.
Brian?
You actually asked
Yeah.
the question I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Okay. Warden?
We went through this 3 or 4 years ago. A young fellow rented the fields from me down below my house, the interval fields, and somebody reported him for cleaning the ditches out. He's cleaning the ditches out, and they said, no, that's a water course. You can't, not allowed to clean that ditch out. And I said, well, field's no good if we don't clean the ditch, it's not gonna drain. But we still weren't allowed, and so they took them about 3 or 4 weeks, so it put us way behind, but in the end, they did come back and say we were allowed to do it. But they will make the decision, and they'll make it without you even asking them. As soon as somebody will complain, the minute you start to dig anywhere near a brook or a waterway, I could go down and work on my river down there and start doing something I thought was gonna plug a hole, and bet that I'd get a call by dinner time. So fishermen and other people are watching, and they, you know, if they think you're gonna ruin their river they fish on, so there's lots of people that have that knowledge to be able to tell you, and I didn't realize that was at the front. But if it's on the developer or whoever wants to do something, to hire the expert. The Department of Environment certainly has lots of experts in there that can tell you their opinion anyway, and their opinion is what you have to go by. But I think we need to do the right thing, regardless of, you know, how we're gonna get there after it's done. Yes, it might be some more onus on somebody, but I still think it's the right thing to do, and then we figure out how to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. How do you want to move forward in this? Do you want to include that? All those in favor saying to include all water courses instead of just the ones that we identify?
And the definition should be by a professional that's looked after by the applicant.
Can we remove a couple of the ones that you said were very difficult, and you mentioned, Mr. Chair.
Spring?
You have a spring on your property, you don't suddenly have to be, you know, 50 feet away from it or something. I mean, there are some that aren't waterways, but they're, you know, you can claim them as waterways. I think you mentioned what some of those were.
Yeah, ravines, groundwater. Yeah. Yes.
There's a brook at the bottom of the ravine, then obviously.
Yeah, the brook itself, but not necessarily the ravine. Yeah.
Like a highway ditch that moves water, right?
Yeah.
But there's a setback from
Yeah.
that too, so. Okay, is it to agree to include that?
Agreed.
Agreed? Great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, thank you. Next, there's a couple comments in the public hearing feedback on industrial uses. So the first one was a concern about the broadness of the rural general zone, G1 zone, and the potential for heavy industry. In this case, again, I will mention that heavy industrial uses are by development agreement in the rural general zone. There is a mechanism for them, but it does have to go through council and it does have to go through the public and a public hearing. So as much as there's a mechanism, it's not it is a thing that people will be notified about. They'll have their chance to have a say, and you'll have a chance to evaluate it. So that mechanism does exist there to hopefully address some of that concerns. The next thing was a concern about light industrial uses in the community core zone. So the community core zone does permit light industry. This is the zone that applies to certain sewer serviced communities. Light industrial is defined there means the use of a building or machine for machining, manufacturing, assembly, and or processing, and such use shall be wholly contained within the building and shall not be obnoxious. So someone brought, one of the comments was concerned about the potential for conflict there. We did kind of deliberately include it, partly because some of the service communities in the municipality do have existing light industrial uses, and partly because, you can imagine some small machining shops or potentially in some of these areas. But if that's not seen as compatible, that certainly could be removed. And then the same person also had comments with a desire to actually be more inclusive of light industrial uses by actually specifying areas, identifying business park type areas for industry. And we did do that a little bit in Abercrombie. We've zoned a fair bit of land specifically for industrial, and light industrial uses are widely permitted in the rural general zone, for example. You could go further and identify specific industrial lands if that was a desire, but recognizing also that the drafts do fairly widely allow light industrial right now. So if there's any direction for changes on any of those, I'd certainly take it.
Warden?
I have no problem with light industrial in community core zones, and as I drive in here each time, I go through Lionsbrook, which is community core, and there's 3 or 4 light industrial businesses there. Most of them take place within buildings. I don't see a lot of outside activity, but to me, they're an important part of those communities. They're not taken away from those communities, they're actually adding to, because there's employment there, and there's customers for the stores and whatnot. They're just part of that zone. I don't think we want to limit it to only houses. I think there's quite a few different types of businesses that operate through Lionsbrook, and they fit together good as a community. As far as I'm concerned, I never hear too many complaints, about those businesses. They're keeping a clean environment on the outside. They don't become junkyards, and as long as they reach those requirements that the community has, if they suddenly become a junkie place or a lot of noise and disruption going on, but they certainly don't in that area. So I think light industrial is a broad description too. Sometimes some junkyards consider themselves light industrial. And if they happen to be on that main highway through Lionsbrook, I think you'd have a problem. So I don't think there's any problem with, as long as we maintain the right description of light industrial. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my first question is, how do you define what obnoxious is? Like, my obnoxious may not be that person's obnoxious. So you can get into a bit of a conflict over that. So that's a definition that's pretty obscure to me, so.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that is one, that is defined in the land use bylaw, and it's one that is fairly well tested in law. It comes up a lot in nuisance law and stuff like that. But obnoxious means a use which from its nature or operation creates a nuisance or is offensive by the creation of noise or vibration or by reason of emission of gas, fumes, dust, oil, or objectionable odor, or by reason of unsightly storage of goods, wares, merchandise, salvage, refuse matter, waste, or other material.
You got it.
There.
Okay, there's my answer.
There you go.
Okay. And you mentioned Abercrombie. Could you just refresh my memory of where an Abercrombie light industrial would be allowed, since I live there. And I don't want a sawmill next to me. Right across.
It's probably your neighbors.
Yeah, so it's the stretch where the tire plant is, kind of that stretch of road there. Okay.
So how far down does it go?
Uh,
Goes from town
I wonder if,
down to,
wonder if I can,
just to, I saw it and I remember where it is, but I just,
do you have the paper map there, Councilor Palmer?
clarification.
What's that?
Do you have
Yep.
the zoning map there?
Yep.
Yeah?
You want to,
Yeah, can I do a little Vanna White here?
yep.
Would the existing use of that building be light industrial? The tire recycling? No, exactly. It's,
It's the same thing as Trinity.
yeah, like Greenfoot. Yeah. So would it be like, it may be zoned inappropriately now.
So it goes, and this is light? That's industrial, right? So here's the town limits right there. So as you go down Abercrombie Road, you got C1, P2 is what?
Commercial recreation.
That's the golf course.
What's the red? Red is the C1. Brown is community core, and the yellow is that rural mixed use that we have.
And where's the light industrial, you know where?
So the light industrial is going to community core.
Is it CC all
It's
along?
it's the brown section there.
Okay.
Your house is in it.
Yeah, tear down my house.
There you go. See? You came prepared. Okay, Bonnie, did you have a question?
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm going to ask it at the wrong time. My question regards how the S1 zone was changed to rural general a few meetings ago. I just wanted to talk about that.
Okay. Now,
I didn't want to miss my chance.
Yes.
I thought it was mentioned just here.
That was G1, but yeah, maybe we can talk about that right after this,
Sure.
if I can.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
yeah, I was gonna say. We good? So, and I agree with Borden's comments about, in my area, Thorburn area, it's primary residential, but we have light industrial in that community too. We have a machine shop, and we have, for springs and custom spring welding, things like that, and those are part of the community, and the community's always accepted, and I hate to see that leave those areas, right, so. But I'm good with that. Everybody's good? Okay, we'll move on.
And actually, if I may, maybe we'll talk, there is a point later on about S1 zoning, so maybe we can lump it in with that one if that works.
Okay?
Okay. The next comment, there was a comment in one of the feedback pieces about split zone properties, suggesting that properties should not be split zoned. So that's where you have one PID that has one or two, two or more zones on it. So I've cropped a picture of River John zoning map here, and you can see it illustrated well. So the core area is this community core is in brown. This yellow is the rural mixed use, and then the white's the rural general. So, this property here is big and long, and it actually does have three different zones on it. We, as a matter of practice, try to align zone boundaries with property boundaries as much as possible. It makes it easy to know where they are. It makes it easy to administer. But sometimes, and Pictou County has a lot of these, you do get very large properties where if you were to zone the whole thing one zone, you're maybe not meeting the intent of that zone anymore. So, for example, the community core zone is intended for sewer service communities. So it makes sense to put it on the front end of this property where there is sewer, but if we were to not split zone, this whole area would be in community core, even though it's very much not the core of the community. So, you know, you could take that approach if you wanted to, but we certainly wouldn't recommend doing that. You know, split zoning has its place sometimes, I would say, is my response to that.
Okay. What's your wishes? Do you want to leave it as is, or do you want to? I think in situations like that, you don't have to.
Yeah.
You don't have to, because if not, that's. Yeah. No, I guess we agree, so we'll
Okay.
keep it the same. Okay.
Okay, the next one is zoning. So first of all, there was a comment on, in one of the pieces of feedback about zoning on property that we had flagged that we had changed it, and then the zoning map doesn't reflect that, and I checked, and he's right. So we will correct that. That's Mr. Battist's property. So we'll fix those. Just wanted to flag that we would do that. The next comment was on the S1 zone. So we do have a specific request from a couple of members of the Caribou Shores community who had been originally happy that the S1 zone was there, and then we removed it from everywhere, and they've flagged that as a concern for them. They would like the protection of the S1 zone, so they've requested that it be reinstated in the Caribou Shores area, and then also a broader discussion about the S1 zone.
Okay. Bonnie, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was a little bit confused when I watched the council meeting when council did decide to take away the S1 zone and instead change to rural general. And I was glad that there were a number of people who wrote letters, Dorianne Riom, Linda Barron, Trudy Reinhold. And I thought, well, what's the difference between the two? What's allowed in rural general that wouldn't be allowed in S1? So can I just have 2 minutes? I just want to read this list. So in S1, you're allowed accommodations, farmers market, marina, marine recreation provider, private club, restaurant, eat-in, restaurant, eat-out, and a retail store. In G1, you're allowed all those things, plus agritourism, animal care, auto fueling, auto repair, auto washing, banks and financial institutions, campgrounds, craft food and beverage production, drinking establishment, farm machine sales and services, garden and nursery sales and supplies, marine recreation provider, an office, it's kind of broad, personal service shop, private club, racetrack, retail, lumber and home improvement yard, service and repair shop, an outdoor shooting range, and tour operator. So I didn't know, I'm surprised that people would want all of that to be allowed on S1 instead of just keeping it S1, because I was surprised that the things allowed in S1 aren't enough. I didn't really know why people along S1 would need to do all of those other things. So I don't really know if it's within my control, but are we allowed to suggest that it goes back for another vote, back to council for another vote, to possibly change that back to S1?
So the reason we
Thank
took
you.
the S1 zone away was because it was sporadic. It was just on certain lots. It wasn't the whole, we had no consistency along the shore. There'd be like 10 lots would have S1, then the next 10 lots wouldn't have it, then 5 lots would have it, 1 lot wouldn't have it. So there's no consistency with what we presented to council. So in order to make everything right, this council's going to have to decide whether we want to do shoreline protection or not. So it was decided that at future meetings, we'll have to discuss if we're going to take that route. If we do take that route, then we'd add extra protection in there for that. And the other thing about, that's valuable land along the shore. Nobody's going to put a fueling thing out there. A lot of those uses nobody's going to do because it's valuable land and people aren't going to to do those kind
Well,
of things, right?
Sorry, am I allowed to speak?
What's that?
I didn't know if I'm allowed to speak when you're speaking, if I need to wait. So,
Yeah, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
thank you. But aren't they already, the things that are, I don't understand the harm in putting S1 on everything instead of G1, because I realize that you're saying, oh, well, probably no one's going to come and put a shooting range on the waterfront, or probably no one's going to come and put a gas station on the waterfront. But if someone does, the folks who live there don't really have much recourse because, oh, it's already zoned for this. So I didn't understand the harm in leaving everything S1. And then since we do have the ability to make changes on a case-by-case basis, if someone wants to come in and put an outdoor shooting range, can they bring it to council and say, hey, because I realize that uniformity is preferred, but is it realistic? So anyways, I thank you very much. I
Yep.
think I've said everything I needed to say. Thank you.
And I've heard from a lot of landowners down in the Little Harbor area, actually, we're glad that we took the S1 zone out of there. So we have had few people talk about the S1, but we never really had a whole lot of feedback from that. And I think for us to make that decision based on a few people, you know, I think we have to go through a much greater process than that. I think we have to do it through the shoreline protection, so. Okay, Bonnie?
Thank you. Well, we were concerned when we were watching, we were surprised it happened so quickly because all of a sudden, Councillor Palmer actually sort of just said, well, why don't we just do it all G1? And I remember Councillor Wadden was surprised and she said, well, this is sort of fast. This is definitely going to affect my constituency. Shouldn't there be some time to consult? But then council voted to change everything to G1 and it just didn't seem right to me. And so I felt there are a lot of people. I feel like that was quite a few people to respond to that, including us, which we didn't write a letter. And then, and Councillor Wadden as well, and I believe, and also the warden, I believe, were nays on that. That's all. I just wanted to bring it up again and make sure that everyone understood what's
So-
allowed in G1.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I did bring that up and I made the motion to do that, but it's council's decision to have done that. And I think there was the consistency that wasn't there, right? That we didn't have all the shoreline included in that decision. So I think that's why it was changed. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if you could give us the rationale for the first iteration of the zoning that we had, that there was a split between the S1 and, what's the other name of the other one, G1? What was it, the G1?
Road.
What was the rationale that you did split those up in the first place?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So the original S1 zone, we applied it around lakes, major lakes within 300 meters, roughly. And then along the coastal areas, it was to private road subdivisions. So it was where there's private roads. In some instances, we had to make a call whether a property was fronting on the private road or was fronting on the adjacent highway, for example. And so sometimes, you know, one property would be in and one would not be in. But yeah, that was the kind of fundamental differentiation in the original drafts.
Okay, Deputy Warden, or Warden, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a sticky one, because I've heard from people on both sides of this. And, you know, I understand Councillor Palmer's point of view of the inconsistency. But is that the only way to try and correct it, is just to put everything into G1? That may be just as big a mistake as having the inconsistency in the S1, I think. But I think we need another kick at this can. Maybe we did change here tonight on the rivers and brooks and that type of one from what we had originally. But I do agree with what Councillor Palmer said tonight, that this one needs that broader discussion to do with our whole coastal situation. It's a bigger discussion than just our plan, I think. That includes the Coastal Erosion Act that the province negated and wants us to go a different way. And it includes this S1 zone, and it includes a lot of stuff along our water shore that's very important to a lot of people. So I understand your questions and concerns about the people that brought this forward, and that's usually if you get 5, then there's another 500 out there that are similar thinking that aren't going to bother writing a letter or aren't going to bother speaking out. So I think it's still an issue that we can't put to bed, but for now, I don't think we can change it in this, or I don't think we should, I should say, not that we can't, because I think it needs to be part of that overall discussion of how are we in Pictou County going to protect our coast along here, and the S1 zone, whether we reinstate it or whatever, we have the ability, do we not, once we pass the plan, if we had discussion later on, public discussions on the whole shoreline, do we not have the ability to change it again later?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. These documents are living documents and they're council's documents, so at any time, council can initiate a process to amend them. You have to initiate a process every 10 years, but you can certainly do that earlier if there are specific issues that you want to amend the documents for. And so, yeah, certainly coastal issues could be one of those, and I actually think I understand that you're working with Clean Foundation and on some stuff like that as well, so, you know, there's funding out there to do projects like that, so.
I think it's a bigger issue, and it involves more than just, so the idea of changing it now back to S1 or whatever, I don't think is the right move, because I think it needs to be part of that bigger discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree on both sides. I voted for it in council to put it back into G1 because I didn't think it was fair the way it was. Some were, some weren't. But this is specific ask for Caribou Shores. Can we handle that one separately than the whole thing? They're specifically asking that we put that parcel back into S1. And maybe it should be, in my feeling. Is that possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly it's possible if you wanted to do a one-off, you could. It would, yeah, it's up to you. As
So,
the zone still exists, we've kept it for the source water areas, so if you wanted to apply it somewhere, you could. But yeah, it would be a one-off, very much.
so is it taking in more property than the property owners? There's property owners that requested this. Is it taking in property owners that didn't request this?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, or to you, I suppose. My understanding, you know, and I'm taking this on face value, to be fair, is that that there is a road owners association, and that this individual is speaking on behalf of the road owners association. So it would be for all the
Just for that one property?
It will be for the properties on that road, on that private road that's governed. Now, I'm taking it on face value that this individual is indeed speaking on their behalf. So.
And that's the problem, right? It's something where if it's that group and you're affecting other people, these other people don't know about it, then you know what I mean? If it's just for a certain property that is owned by that homeowners group and that's what they want to do, then that's fine, but if they're considering other properties that aren't a part of that group, so.
Yeah.
The lot next to it will be owned by provincial government, Caribou Park, I presume.
Yeah, let me get the letter specific.
Does it take any other properties going in there? But it's only shoreline properties. Right. Oh. But it's only for shoreline properties, right? property. Yeah, yeah, around the lakes. So if there's a property back, it would affect it. Yeah. It wouldn't.
Sorry about this, I'm just finding the.
So it's Brayshore Enterprises Limited. So,
Is specific condo property?
yeah.
Okay.
It's just one PID number?
Well, there's, the problem with it is, like, I can't share this, but, the condo corp is one big parcel. There's a piece right in the middle of it that's owned by somebody different. And then towards the park, there's another small piece owned. So it's kind of like that.
So those other.
Sorry, it would be the condo board, one of the members of the condo board, yeah.
So this is not, the yellow is what I would assume is the condo corporation. Because it has a bunch of homes, it's on Old Orchard Lane and, down there, and it does show, I bet it,
Lake right back there too, right?
and then, so this parcel right in the middle is not owned by, and it's got a residential assessment, it's 55 Old Orchard Lane, so it's not part of the corporation. And then this one there is not owned by it either. And then there's a small piece there and a small piece there.
Is that a lake or what's that out on?
This here, I'm not sure what that is. It's a large body of water.
Body water down there too.
Oh, okay.
And then this is the provincial park there. Her Majesty the Queen. Should be the king.
What would you like to do? Go ahead.
I guess it's pretty well can't do it when there's other pieces of land and property owners in that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I guess through you, Mr. Chair, is one of those funny situations where, I mean, you could do it for that one property, but it's not in a way protecting them. They have control over what they do on their own property, and I certainly wouldn't recommend applying it to the properties around them without those owners' knowledge and, you know, that is what they
Yeah.
would be potentially concerned about, is their neighbors doing something.
Exactly.
But at the same time, I don't know if it's appropriate to say we're gonna one-off apply the S1 zone to these neighbors.
I think it's something that we have to look at in a future planning session, so.
Yeah, as kind of a comprehensive relook at the S1 zone and coastal issues might be the cleaner way of doing it, quite frankly.
Okay. Does everybody agree? Okay, we'll move on there.
Okay, we did get a letter from a gentleman suggesting that we use geology and geoscience and, oh, yeah. My apologies.
Okay, Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mean to harp on, I'm just afraid to miss my chance. I was wondering, just getting back to the S1 versus the G1, if the main reason was conformity, I was wondering what would be the negative to just making it all S1, because there are a lot of businesses allowed. I was just thinking, and Warden Parker was just talking about how, and this is a living document, that it can be revisited. But if something is zoned right now, where, and I want to go and I want to open my outdoor shooting range on the shoreline, so I go in and I start building because I'm allowed to, then the other residents come and say, wait a minute, we don't want that here. Doesn't the person who built their business there, because that was the existing zoning when they did, don't they have the final say? Like, isn't it kind of too late for council to come back then and say, oh, no? That's my concern. Thank you.
Well, shooting ranges are regulated by the province, right? So it's something that the province would have to.
Well, it's not just that, it's this list of
Oh, I
stuff
know.
too.
Just going on with the shooting ranges, because I have one in my area, and there's a lot of restrictions to it, and things like that. Now, I actually have 2 or 3 in there. And there's a lot of restrictions that they just don't allow them to go anywhere. But I know what you're saying, there's a lot of other uses there, but I don't think, myself personally, I don't think we heard from enough people along the shoreline to really make a decision to put that S1 zone in there. People that are there now have no protection. It would be the same as what today is, it is after we pass this bylaw, right?
Well,
To
but,
me, I think we need more input from those people on the shoreline. I think that we probably should send out a survey.
that sounds
some
great.
point To every property owner along the shoreline to get their feelings. Because I know from the past, you only hear from the people that don't want it. The people that want it, vice versa, don't want it. Those other people you don't hear from. So I think something as important as this, we should hear from a lot of people, right, in order to make that decision. So
Absolutely.
that is my personal take on it.
But it was already chosen, right? Without that. But it was already chosen without the consultation. You're saying we need more consultation, but it was already decided upon.
I think we need consultation with those people that own those properties.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, so I think that we should be sending out a survey to those property owners to find out what their feelings are on it. If they want shoreline protection, if they want an S1 zone, to get a feel for those people, because I think we only heard from, and I know we heard from a couple of people that aren't even along the shoreline to make that we should be protecting it, right? So I think that in order to move forward, council will have to hear from a vast majority of those property owners before making a decision. And that's, once we make this S1, it's pretty hard to go back. Once you make that decision, you're pretty well stuck with it.
Oh, okay, so that's not the case with G1? You can't go back? Because I thought this was it's a living document that can be
Yeah.
changed?
Yeah, but it's pretty hard to put a restriction in as a G1 is a general zone, and then you could probably bump it up to S1 or whatever, if the public wanted that, but it's pretty hard to go back from an S1 back to a G1,
So
I think, yeah.
I just have one more question. What would be, okay, the main reason that we changed all of S1 to G1 was for conformity? What would be the negative to just making it all S1 instead of G1?
Because we don't know if the people in that area want those restrictions or not. If we had a survey done by those people to say, yes, we'd rather have that S1 there instead of the G1, then we can,
But didn't we already make that decision for them didn't council already make that decision when they voted to make everything G1 instead of S1? I'm sorry, I hope I'm not asking
no.
dumb questions, but this just makes sense to me, and,
No, we just felt that it's a bigger issue than making a few properties S1 along the shore. It wouldn't be fair to make them all S1 without consulting those other people, right? So-
but is it more fair to make them all G1?
It's council's decision, whatever council decided, so,
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
okay. Warden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still feel we have to consult the people a lot more, I agree on that. But I think before we send any surveys just out, the province has done a lot of surveys and they only announce them if they're positive the way they want them. I think before we do the surveys, I think we have to educate people. We have to at least have public meetings, discussions, something, some way so that people realize, you know, they're getting a piece of paper, do a survey, and they're not even sure what the terms mean, or, so I don't disagree with consulting with people, but I do think that sometimes when people get surveys, they just, either just don't bother filling them out because they don't understand what's being asked, or maybe, they just haven't, you know, nobody told them, enough about what's going on. And in terms of the, see, it was always general, it was always G1, that's the same we're talking about now, we're just calling it G1, but that's what it was up until, you know, for the last so many hundred years or whatever. So the change we were making to go from that to S1 was probably done without enough consultation. So this group, eventually council making a decision, decided to, you know, go back to the G1 because of the lack of uniformity. But again, we changed it to a brand new rules without consulting, I think, with enough people. You could say that about anything we did here, I suppose, but that's the one that seems to have a lot of controversy attached to it. So that tells me that we have to go out, you know, educate may not be the right word, but consult with people and let them know what the reasonings are behind things, and then maybe do a survey, and then still council will make that decision. But rather than jump back and forth and make it S1, G1, and back and forth, I think we need to consult with the people more before we do that. Thank you.
And the surveys, I mentioned surveys, but that's part of the process. Right, so it's not the whole process, but it's where we get the feel for what the public would like.
Yeah, once they know what we're
Deputy?
Chair, and we still got to deal with the Coastal Protection Act that we didn't touch yet, so that'll like to be part off. That'll be part off that, for
It'll be
sure.
all part of one. Okay?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, there was a letter suggesting that we utilize geology and geoscience in establishing zone boundaries. I have seen that done in some communities in regards to like hazard areas and stuff, karst topography and that sort of thing. Given the, I think, you know, minimum planning of these documents, might be going a little too far down the rabbit hole to do that, but I certainly appreciate the intersection of geoscience and good land use planning, and that might be a piece for the future as these documents further get refined. We also had a request for including more information on the zoning map, including things like protected waters, like provincial regulations and like other data sources that aren't necessarily directly related to zoning. I would recommend against this for two reasons. One, it clutters up the map, and two, it often, you know, gives the suggestion that the municipality is responsible for those other pieces of information. It may be a thing that, you know, you have a good GIS team here and they do online zoning maps. I know you have your GeoHub with all the data, so it may be something where, you know, zoning could be one layer that in the GeoHub where people could also overlay other data sources, but in the document itself, I wouldn't recommend including provincial regulatory data or anything like that. It keeps it clean, keeps it separate to do that. And then finally, there was a concern about zoning on 635 Arbuckle Road as a rural commercial. So this is I understand a bit of a treatment facility for hazardous materials or chemical materials. We have it zoned rural commercial, and I think it wasn't the property owner who brought up this concern. It was a concerned citizen who was worried about grandfathering the use in. And I think the reality is that, you know, under those non-conforming provisions, whatever we zone this property, it is grandfathered in. So I'm not sure there's anything to be done there in terms of changing the approach to that property necessarily. Do you have any concerns or questions about any of that?
So that, oh, go ahead, Warden.
I just, well, I don't know if you're winding up or not, I have a
I am.
couple things I wanted to bring up, more general about how this whole process, where we're at and how it's gone.
Yeah.
But I don't want to cut us off if you're still.
Well, I got that slide. I got 2 more slides after that one, so.
Okay, we'll wait till you get those done, if you may include some of the things I got.
Okay.
I just think on that last one there, it's about educating the people because they don't understand.
Yeah.
They think that we're gonna zone something, they already have it there, that they're gonna have to gather up and go away somewhere, but I think education on that is a big part.
Yeah. Okay. There was 2 things well, I guess one, for the purpose of those water course things, having a clear definition of where the coastline, shoreline, when does the river become a coast? So we'd recommend adding, some definition in there into the documents of where that line is between inland and coastal. And then the other thing was the topsoil removal. So the Municipal Government Act protects non-conforming uses, so a use that's no longer permitted, it protects them as non-conforming. Oops. However, non-conforming uses aren't allowed to expand. That raises an interesting question in regards to something like topsoil removal, is what does expansion mean? Is it crossing onto a new property? Is it exactly where they've dug up and no further? What is the size of an operation? Is it everything they already own and they can't own more? So I think in clarity for that, to not have a situation where there has to be an argument over whether this use is grandfathered or not, that we should specifically identify what's considered the existing topsoil removal business in these documents, that this is the operation as it exists on the date. Probably allowing for some operational expansion within that, because I would suspect. But,
Can you talk to Logan about that particular property?
Yeah.
He's got all the details on it.
Of what?
He was gonna call, I had a call from the landowner's son regarding this, and I talked to Logan about it, and Logan was gonna talk to the landowner's son specifically on it.
okay.
I don't know whether or not he did, but he has all the details in regards to where the property is and where the extraction of the topsoil is and all that stuff. So if you could talk to Logan specifically about that,
Can do.
I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Warden?
I don't want to see anybody put out of business. I mean, they've invested money in their business and everything, whether it be trucks or whatever. And there is still land in Pictou County that we're only ruling out class 2, 3, and what's used in 4. So there is still lots of land available. Somebody asked me one time, am I going to have to go to Colchester to get topsoil? No, there's lots of topsoil here. It's just that we don't want to ruin good farm fields, which is what's happening now. One of my concerns is that we treat everybody the same, because there's a number of people in this business, probably more than I know, and we don't want to say, well, we made an exception for one fellow, but the rest of them, you can't do it anymore. And somebody's going to have to come up with whatever is the size of the business that they're on that will, allow them to. Most of those fields are done now if they've already dug half them up. There's not much left in some of those fields. So to say, well, we're going to leave half it not dug up and half it dug up, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think enough to allow them to continue for a period of time, those that are in the business, until they can, but they have to know they have to find other sources that aren't class 2, 3, or 4, and not just keep buying up another guy's interval field and say, there, I'm good for the next 10 years. Yeah. Somehow we have to be fair to the ones that are in it, but also they need to know there's a closing chapter here or whatever to doing this. Now, whether that'll be enough to satisfy the government, I don't think they'd be against us treating people fairly. But, no, I'm not, like I say, against, I'm not out to drive people out of business. I just know that if we don't save this soil, it's not gonna come back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anybody else? So,
Okay with that?
clear what we want?
All right, and finally, there was a whole bunch of different comments that I don't necessarily think require discussion, but I want to, or direction. We can discuss them. I don't necessarily think they require direction, but I did want to bring them to your attention just so they're not lost. One is there's a concern that many mobile home parks are not mentioned in the documents, and just wanted to say that that's because the municipality has a separate mini mobile home park bylaw that deals with those, so that's separate from these planning documents. And then kind of related to that, a concern about prohibiting private roads in sewer serviced areas, specifically because they are related to, or they're important to many mobile home parks. Two things on that. One, that prohibition actually already exists in your subdivision bylaw now. We haven't changed that as part of these documents. And second, is that the roads that are in mobile home parks are actually, from a bylaw perspective, are generally driveways. It's all on one lot, so that's not affected. You can still have that mobile home park with a quote-unquote road, but it's actually a driveway that serves all those lots. So I don't think there's an issue there. We again heard the comment to not require studies, not have all the, we discussed this at the last direction setting meeting, that the documents shouldn't have the ability to require all these extra studies. And the direction at the time with you was to keep them as is. And I think as our discussion tonight about water courses showed, that like that is important to have that tool to you know, where there's situations where you're not sure it's a water course, that you can ask for a study. They shouldn't be used punitively. It shouldn't be something that the municipality gets in the habit of asking for a study for everything, but when you want it, you do want to be able to ask for it. So we could change that if you wanted to, but I would suggest we keep it as is. And then there was comments about a number of things that we don't deal with through land use planning. They can be things that municipalities regulate, but land use planning documents don't. So things like ATVs and pesticides. Some things like fracking, it's simply not in a municipality's wheelhouse. Some municipalities have tried. If you got a bold lawyer, I guess you could do it, but yeah, so things like ATVs, pesticides, biosolids, fracking, noise ordinances, right to know, those things are not things that the Municipal Government Act enables us to do through planning. You could have your own noise ordinance separate from that, but it's not a planning thing. And then finally, we heard a couple concerns about level of engagement, having not heard of it or not having enough engagement of the process, and then one individual who was wondering about a legal review for the documents and making sure that they were legal, concerned that we weren't addressing things like pesticides and biosolids. And certainly that is, as a municipality, within your wheelhouse to, I'm not infallible. If you wanted to get a legal review, you certainly could do that. And I think that summarizes all the comments that you received as part of the public hearing.
Okay. Warden, did you want to? Just
We wind up. One of them is on there, which is the number of people consulted. And I think our staff did a relatively good job of trying to, make sure the meetings were publicized. I think we had 6 meetings in December. It's unfortunate they came in December. September probably would have been better or something, but we were up against the timeline, or thought we were. December is not a good time. In fact, we got better turnouts in January at the climate meetings. Time January comes, people are kind of bored for something to do. There's no more Christmas to get ready for. But yeah, that had some role in it. I think it also was partly, maybe sometimes people just aren't understanding what we're up to and just think, well, that's of no interest to me, until they find out someday, well, I guess it is now that it's in front of me. But no, we tried as hard as we could. I think staff tried as hard as they could, and we did some online stuff, and eventually we did hear back from quite a few people. But you're never going to, when you send out surveys or talk about or other things, you're only gonna touch a very small fraction of the people, no matter what you do. And you have to depend on those ones for being a percentage representation of what's out there. The majority of people do not respond to whatever we're doing at municipal level, provincial level, federal level, really any level of government. They just figure, oh, let them do it. So to think that we're going to talk to every person in rural Pictou County, or every, even half of them, it's never ever going to happen, no matter what you do. So I think you do the best you can to consult with people. You can say, well, you talked to less than 1% of the people. Well, we talked to the ones that showed up, and we did as good a job as we could, I think, of telling them, you know, that the meetings were being held. So I don't see that as a reason to say, well, this isn't valid because you didn't talk to at least half the people. That will never happen. The other one, and it was mentioned in one letter anyway, maybe it's more than one, but about how come we keep talking about minimalist planning, minimal planning. So that's all I hear is minimal planning. Well, that's in my case anyway, and I suspect other councillors, many of them, that's what we're hearing from our public. Don't come in telling us what color you have to paint your barn and what angle you have to have it. And, you know, people don't want to be told generally a whole lot of stuff they can't do. But we did recognize, well, we had a provincial, you know, demand really is why we started this. But there is some benefit in doing it, and, you know, to make sure that we're set up as good as we can for development, that we have some separation between industrial and where people live and whatnot. So there's some good reasons to do it, but what I heard from most people is just don't go overboard on this. Keep it light. And anybody that's around the 70s here in Pictou County knows where it can go when it gets beyond a certain point, and we did not want to go there. And so I think we managed to do that without causing this terrible uproar. Yes, we have people asking questions and concerned about things, but I think most people that came to the meetings felt they got the answers they were looking for, and many got them from you later by contacting you directly. So I think overall, we've come through this, and we're still not finished yet, but we come through relatively unscathed in terms of what it could have been, what it was in the 70s. And if we can just carry the ball the rest of the way, if we're redoing what we already did and we're changing some things, and that's fine. I often tell the provincial government, you know, it's not bad to change your mind. That's a good sign that you re-looked at things and decided to do it slightly different. That's a good sign. I think it's the same with us. If we re-look at things and decide to change a few, that's a good thing. So I think overall, our number of people we consulted with and the minimalist of the planning turned out good. Like I say, we have to carry it the rest of the way here, and hopefully we will. And then we will look at the coastal one farther down the road by itself and see where that one takes us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else? If not, so you'll have this ready for us for our first reading on April 7th, is it?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, your next regular council meeting is April 7th. We can turn these edits around ahead of that. It will not be me who attends because I have a conflict, unfortunately, that was booked a long time ago. So it'll be my colleague Paul, who's been out to some of the meetings. You've probably met him, and he's a very, very capable guy. So he will be there to handle that. But yeah, if you want him for April 7th, we'll have him for April 7th.
That's their,
Will we get a copy of the changes made?
we'll get a copy before the change.
Yeah, we'll once we get the copy done, I'll send the updated documents along with a summary of the changes, just like we did with previous versions. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Probably be early next week that we'll get to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we have on the 24th, that special council meeting, and we were going to do a committee of the whole after. So that may be an opportunity to introduce those changes to council. Like, we were going to plug it with a few internal items, but Sue-Ann and I talked today and said, well, the things we were going to fill the agenda with are not critical items, so maybe we could use
Okay.
the committee of the whole just to give council
Yeah.
a heads up prior to the following week's meeting, right? Or 2 weeks' meeting, I guess, so. I'm not sure if that meets your timeframe, Ian.
I was gonna say, is that doable, Ian?
Yeah, we'll do the edits early next week, I think, and then, that should be, so that will give you time to review them ahead of that meeting, so that should be doable.
When do we get sent out?
Typically, we would send it out on Wednesday. We've got a couple of items. Accessibility are meeting next Thursday, so there's their plan update. And there is the anti-racism and inclusion plan that's been worked on. That will go to that committee Thursday night, and then to council on the 24th, because they're technically supposed to be in place by April 1. So those items won't go out till Friday, so
If you can have them for us by Wednesday, that'd be great, if not Friday.
Should be able to do it by Wednesday,
Okay.
get it off the to-do list.
Yeah, it'll give more time for council to have a review of it, so.
Through you, Mr. Chair, did we get our extension through? From the province, like we were March 31st, and we were gonna ask for an extension?
Yeah.
not at this point, so.
Okay. Right now, it's still March 31st.
Well, yeah,
They seem agreeable to the
yeah,
extension.
so what we'll do with these changes is we'll go back to the director of planning and say that we've made changes to address the concerns raised, and it'll be forthcoming, and here's our new plan.
Is there anything further to come before the meeting? If not, I'll call it adjourned. Thank you.